You're listening to the OKC 82 podcast with Brady Trantham and Madison Morris. The best place for OKC Thunder basketball. A part of 107.7 The Franchise Podcast Network.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the OKC 82 podcast, part of the Franchise Podcast Network. Brady Trantham here with Madison Morris over the Zoom machine. In these trying times where people are worried about, jobs, money, the economy, a few businesses have been just propped up by the current situation, Madison. One of them being toilet paper. So if you have toilet paper stock going into the previous month, you're probably pretty happy. And Zoom is like winning the pandemic right now because everybody's doing their podcasts, everybody's doing their jobs from home, which is the smart thing. Over Zoom. So shout out to you, Zoom, for making our jobs a little bit easier, a little bit more fun. But Madison, how are you doing so far?
Doing well. I'm here at my house in Oklahoma City, and I've kind of gone a little bit back and forth from my parents' house to here in Oklahoma City, but obviously not going into work anymore, which is, it's been different, but obviously for the best because we want to kickstart pretty much getting back to normal. So everything's been great. And Zoom has been awesome because social interaction is very important to me. And so now getting to do that via Zoom is a blessing in disguise. So it's awesome.
Exactly. But we are actually joined by a very, very special guest today. Friend of the podcast because he's been on the podcast before, but now with his second time, I guess that makes you a best friend of the podcast. But it's everybody's favorite mayor of Oklahoma City, Mr. David Holt. Sir, welcome to the show once again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Really, right off the bat, I'm just kind of curious about this because I've been trying to really pay attention to certain political leaders, just anybody that's important that's giving press conferences or anything, because we're all having to stay home. Businesses have that aren't deemed essential have been shut down for the foreseeable future. One of them being, barbershops, salons. And I'm just curious, do you have a plan, no matter how long we get into this quarantining thing, do you have a plan for your hair? Because I can just picture Donald Trump not having Donald Trump would have a barber in the White House, but local leaders that just my hair's going to grow out because, I can't go get it cut.
I feel so we're on video, as you pointed out, and I can see you right now, and I feel like I'm looking at my plan right now. You are my future. Yeah.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. No, because Madison and I normally during this time of the year we'd be in the arena covering the Thunder and doing some on-camera stuff. So I typically shave, and I can't rock a beard at all. I can't rock long hair anyway. But it's let me try it just to see where it takes me is basically my idea.
Well, that part of my head will not grow. I could never do what you have right there if I waited a month. Fortunately, I have the skills to shave myself, but no, the hair. I resigned myself when I closed salons a couple of weeks ago that we were going to have a situation like you have willingly embraced, but in my case by force. So I don't know. I'm looking at it as a new adventure.
Good to go. Madison, obviously you've complained to me about your nails and that your hair's going to get longer.
Female things.
But you still look like $100 million. So I almost said $100, but you look like $1 million. But go ahead and start off the fun.
I'm really
podcast.
glad to finally be in the middle of this Sam and Diane thing you guys have going on here.
Oh, heck yeah. Welcome in. It's a good time.
It works.
It does work.
Podcast dynamic.
I kind of had a question myself for you, Mayor Holt, and it was just something that I was talking about with a few of my friends. And obviously I've been talking with Brady about it as we prepared for this podcast, but with everything that comes in and how quickly everything changes with the situation that's going on, just what are your steps to relaying the message out to people and kind of condensing it to where it's not set in a panic tone or anything like that, but kind of take us through your steps of just getting all of this information out to the public and what you think is best for everyone.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
I'm changing this. This is all part of our new normal is we've got to move around our homes to keep up with.
Oh yeah. I'm thankful the dogs haven't barked downstairs just yet.
Okay, so to answer your question, yeah, obviously what's been really interesting in this whole scenario is that so much of it is really mass psychology and addressing, how do you how do you communicate to people in a way that will get the message across effectively? I mean, we're all sort of to draw a sports analogy, we're all sort of head coaches now, trying to find the right buttons to push and motivate our residents, much like a coach motivates his players. Because we're in a free society. I mean, it's reported that the mayor has ordered this and the governor has ordered that. But reality, is that we don't have armies to enforce these orders. We have to find some level of self-motivation. I mean, maybe early on when we were closing things like bars and restaurants, we could, enforce those things, those business closures. But, when it reached the level of the individual, which is really what you're at when you're talking about shelter in place, I don't have 650,000 police officers to regulate the behavior of 650,000 residents. So, it really becomes an issue of trying to communicate that in a way that they can understand and accept and agree with. And that every individual in our city can see the need to do this, if for no other reason than their own self-preservation. So that's been, obviously part of the challenge, and trying to communicate with the people of Oklahoma City. By the way, how loud are my kids right now? Because I feel like I can barely hear myself talk.
Oh, they can get louder if they want. They're now friends of the podcast as well.
Welcome.
Whether they like it or not.
But you mentioned not, in finding the right balance, but I do want people to have a healthy dose of fear. You mentioned panic. I mean, I don't want to use the word panic, but I don't also want, they can't be complacent either. I mean, this is a very serious issue. So I have to share the data, and I'm not going to gloss over it, but it's a, I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but a lot of it is pretty gloomy. So, I mean, it is what it is, and people have to take it seriously.
Yeah, I mean, healthy concern is important. It's just to be knowledgeable about what you can and can't do, what you are required to do, what you're encouraged to do, what's the smart thing to do. I mean, those are all important, and I completely understand. I unfortunately had to do the post-game show after the Thunder and the Jazz game that never happened, and I was pretty freaked out, but I understood. I can't be freaked out on the radio. I can't help to incite a panic or of any type. But with all that, what inspiration do you kind of cling on to, or what best case scenario? Like, basically, it took me like a few days to kind of get used to the new normal that is right now, and just like everybody else, I'm still concerned. I'm still like a little fearful of what could happen, what can't happen. But what keeps me going every day is just understanding that this is going to end at some point. We're like, science is going to catch up to it. Immunity, whatever happens, it will happen, and we'll be able to return back to normal at some point in the next few months or in the next year. It's going to end. But for you personally, what is giving you hope that, although everything I have to say pretty much every day is doom and gloom and increased numbers, but at the same time, there is going to be a light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, I think the upside right now, I think about, as you said, the reality that this will end at some point. There is another chapter on the other side of this one. And the return to normalcy may be staggered. It may not be all at once. And unfortunately, things like large public gatherings will probably be the last, milestone that we cross. And so when you think how that affects sports, that's going to be really interesting. I think sporting events will have a choice to make probably sooner rather than later about whether they try to do their events without fans. I think that's because I think those types of, the idea of putting 20,000 people or 80,000 people together anytime soon, that feels very distant. But there might be some calculated risks in the shorter term as we get things a little more under control. And so that'll be interesting. But yes, I think about, to stay optimistic, I think about the fact that regardless, we will eventually return to total normalcy. Might be months, might be a year, depending on the function. But also, there's some upside in the life we're having right now. And I'm trying, I think we all try to find the silver linings in some of these scenarios. Again, you might be able to hear them right now, but I'm spending, all day, every day with my whole family, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think that's kind of a wonderful thing. We're watching family movies every night. We never did that. We're taking walks every night. We never did that. So I think that's a silver lining here. That's not a upside for everybody for any number of different reasons, but for a lot of folks, that has been a new element of this that's actually been kind of welcome. It's sort of the slowing down of the pace of things and reconnecting with our families. So, those are some of the upsides, and some of the things we can look forward to. I would also point out on the bright side of things, at least locally, what we have done with our social distancing in Oklahoma City, and aggressively and early, has clearly made a difference. If you look at the per capita deaths in places like New Orleans, Seattle, New York, it's many, many times what we have here in Oklahoma City. And so, though I have learned that COVID gets you anyway, I mean, we have had dozens of deaths, we have hundreds of cases, despite our best efforts. It's a matter of degrees, and our experience so far is much better than some other places around the United States. And it's not because we have a different strain of it here. I mean, it's the same virus. We've just been very aggressive about social distancing, and we did it very early. And not because we're smarter than everybody else, but because we had the experience they didn't have. We saw what was happening in other cities. By the time it got here, because it got here a little later than other places, we acted really, really fast. On the day that we had our very first case of local spread is when we declared an emergency, and we were closing bars and restaurants 48 hours later. So those types of actions were not done that swiftly in other places, simply because they just hadn't fully, faced the reality of it yet. And we had the knowledge they didn't have. So I'm hopeful that we'll come out of this with less of a loss of life than other places, and we will eventually return to normalcy. Although I still suspect there may be a slight new normal even after everything is deemed safe again. I intend to have fewer meetings and fewer handshakes in the future.
Everybody's going to still have dry hands from washing their hands too much.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many things that we can all take from this quarantine right now. It's just kind of what you were just talking about, David, with the new normalcy. Mm-hmm. I know that for me, I've been more conscious about, what I'm touching throughout the day, and making sure that I keep up with hygiene a lot better. I make sure that I, am washing my sheets, washing my clothes, just like keeping everything a little bit more safe. And I think that's something that we can all take on even after all of this thing dies down a little bit. And so, it's kind of cool to think about all the things that are going to come from this, because once we do get the green light eventually and things kind of, shape back into a normal everyday life, it's kind of something you can take from all this and just put it into what you're doing now. And it can, increase responsibility or increase health and everything like that. But also, I was going to transition. I'm sure that you have talked about this night multiple times, but I'm so excited to hear about it, like here on the OKC 82 podcast, just going back to March 11th. Yeah. And everything that happened with that game, and how it was just so like, is this seriously happening here in Oklahoma City in front of our very eyes? It still mind boggles me every time I think about it. But what were the next 48 hours for you like that, or for you after all of that happened? Just because everything's moving so fast, people are demanding information, people are so confused and kind of like I was confused. So what was that like for you?
That 3-hour window was so surreal, because not only did the whole Thunder thing happen, and then we got like news that Rudy Gobert had tested positive, but also Tom Hanks had tested positive, and his wife Rita Wilson. It's like, what is going on?
You're like, not Tom Hanks.
So if you want to get Americans' attention, take away their sports and infect Tom Hanks. And thankfully they recovered and are fine now. But that was just, I don't think nothing's ever going to top that.
It was wild.
Right. If you had wanted to, have COVID-19 affect the psyche of the United States, and certainly Oklahoma City, you would not have picked a more dramatic scenario. I mean, I often think if Rudy Gobert's test results had come back at 6 p.m. or 8 p.m., it would have been a totally different story. I mean, but for them to come back right at the moment of tip-off, and therefore put everybody into this, kind of frozen situation where the decision was being made in real time in front of not just 18,000, but millions of people, it did force the whole country, and certainly Oklahoma City, to focus on the issue. Um, I was at home. I wasn't planning to attend that game, and so I had put on my PJs, and we were starting to, sit down and watch the game. And then obviously all this happened. By 8, if I recall, 8:30, just my phone was just blowing up with so many different issues. What was, concerns about what was happening over at 21C. So that's where Rudy Gobert was staying, and where the team had stayed, and he was still there, and they were kind of, freaking out. They didn't know what to do. It wasn't like a SWAT team of health officials lands there. From a public health perspective, he was in his room, and that was a stable situation. But that didn't feel very stable to 21C. So they and their guests were flipping out. I was getting calls from the governor's office, who was getting calls from the Utah governor's office. I was getting calls from Senator Inhofe's office, who was getting calls from Mitt Romney's office, and
Wow.
so on and so on. So all these Utah entities were trying to help and trying to parachute in. So I finally left my house. I got dressed again. I went to the county health department and settled in there with a bunch of their leadership. All of our city management leadership was over at City Hall, and we were linked on a phone call. And we just ended up dealing and working through random issues for the next 3 or 4 hours, really, until I didn't get home till I think 1 o'clock that night. At one point I was even waking up the head of our Convention and Visitors Bureau, so he could in turn wake up and try to find a hotel for the Jazz, because they needed 50 rooms. They had checked out of the 21C, and there wasn't any room for them at the end. So he was working on getting them rooms, and I was back relaying all that information to the NBA league office, which had called me about that specific situation. So all of that, sort of resolved itself by the morning. The Jazz finally flew out of town. Rudy Gobert left at some point. I don't even know exactly how or when he left, but he was at some point extricated. And as you know, what then occurred was sort of a cascade of cancellations across the city and across the United States, but certainly in Oklahoma City, everybody was canceling everything. But it was an interesting disconnect, because Rudy Gobert wasn't really our first case. That was ultimately health history will record that as a Utah case. And so we didn't actually have COVID-19 in our community yet. Even though it had sort of been thrust into our faces, it really wasn't a local public health situation yet. And so we were caught in a weird place. It wasn't until Friday night that we got our first actual confirmed local, or I should say, our first confirmed case. However, the person had caught it while traveling, and that gets treated a little differently by public health officials as well. And so it wasn't actually until finally on Sunday, the 15th, that we finally had a case that someone had caught it locally. And that's really the trigger for CDC guidelines and for public health officials to act. And so that was the day we declared an emergency. And on Tuesday, we started closing things. And then that's sort of the whole process we were engaged in for the next few weeks. But it definitely all started in many ways on the night of the Thunder game. And that was certainly a historic and dramatic moment in the COVID-19 story and in our city's history.
This franchise has been through so much. All they need to do is win a title, and they've probably been through about everything that you could possibly experience as a fan. So, but really quick, sir, before we get to some Thunder topics, I did want to ask you about something a little bit off topic, but because we're coming up on the 25th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing memorial, and unfortunately, it's right in the middle of all this, so we're not going to be able to commemorate it in the way that we classically would do it. The marathon, of course, was pushed back till October. Going through the process of how to properly commemorate this while understanding that, well, you can't have crowds come to the museum. You can't do a classic press conference. What are some plans for you now that you've had to pivot with social distancing moving forward with the Oklahoma City bombing memorial?
Well, we certainly had very big plans, in place to honor the 25th anniversary and to honor those who were lost and the survivors and the people who came to our rescue and all the people that were changed forever. And as you said, all of that is basically being redirected, and so the Memorial's doing a great job. They're putting together a video program that will air at 9 a.m. On April 19th locally. And I actually already taped my speech for that a few days ago, last weekend. And so, they're doing the best they can. It'll be a great program. Will the nation's eyes turn to Oklahoma City that morning as they would have otherwise? Perhaps not. I mean, everybody is very distracted by COVID-19, and we had every expectation of having former presidents and Kristen Chenoweth was going to sing the national anthem, and Bishop Curry, who gave the sermon at Harry and Meghan's wedding, was going to be here, giving the invocation. I mean, we had, a first class commemoration planned, and all of that obviously has changed, but it's still really important to our community, and it's obviously we'll do everything we can from a distance to commemorate the anniversary, and also really try to remind people why it matters moving forward. You guys are pretty young, so I mean, I recognize that 25 years ago, your memories are limited, and that's a reminder that as we hit the 25th anniversary, it really changes from experience into a historical event. And so if it's going to be a historical event, what is it that we take away from it moving forward? And for me, it's always been the fact that political violence is never the answer, that dehumanization is something we must guard against. For someone to blow up an office building full of civilians and children, requires a lot of dehumanization, a lot of disconnect from reality, a lot of effort mentally to cast the people who work in that building as being different from me somehow. And what I fear is that all too often in our current political discourse, I hear that same language and that same vitriol, and this whole idea that some group is the enemy of the people, and that type of dehumanizing language is what ultimately causes these acts of violence. And so that's, to me, the long-term eternal takeaway from events like the Oklahoma City bombing. And so I really think it and the site and the people of Oklahoma City all have to stand for a better discourse, a better way to have conversations. And I think we should be the wise old people in the United States or in the world who have lived and seen what happens when we lose empathy and we lose understanding with each other, and that we should be the first to speak up. And so that's certainly, I'm giving you a bit of a preview probably of my speech that you'll see on April 19th, but that's what I see as the legacy of Oklahoma City bombing that we need to carry forward, and that we're obligated to do so as people who have lived here at any time in the last 25 years.
Yeah, no, for sure. And shout out to Oklahoma City for still doing some pretty good stuff, even amid all the COVID-19 stuff. Mm-hmm. Because obviously the bombing that happened here, that's something that that has been in Oklahoma their whole lives, or even people who do come into Oklahoma, it's something that people hold very special. I personally wasn't even born yet, but I've been in Oklahoma my whole life. And so, obviously I live here in Oklahoma City. That's very important. And so it's going to be kind of a nice shift to say, like, hey, we have something that happened here many years ago. It's the 25th anniversary. So we can maybe take our minds off of that for a day. I'm really looking forward to that. So I think that will be fabulous. So I guess we'll go ahead and kind of switch gears into this Thunder season.
Happy thoughts.
Yeah, happy thoughts. And so even with kind of what's going to happen with the NBA, is it going to start back up? Are they going to do anything? Is the season just going to be canned? I think that's all up in the air. And so in your personal thoughts, just what do you think about the fact that this Thunder team, I don't think people had as high of expectations for them, just because there's no Russell Westbrook, and everyone was a little, timid to think what was going to happen, very hesitant, reluctant about what they could do. Now they're not, or they possibly won't get the kind of ending that people were looking forward to, because they were a fun team after all. And so just what do you think about, the fact that this team not going to get the kind of ending that people were probably hoping to see, but they still have a little bit of a legacy that happened here, just being, such a good team after all.
Yeah, well, the game that never was a critical game, as you know. It would have a victory that night would have, I believe, propelled us in the fourth. Is that right? Am
Yeah,
I
for
remember?
the
That's
fourth seed
correct.
with 16 games left at the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I had a whether we won that or not, I was pretty well convinced we were on a pace that would have taken us into the fourth seed, which just blew away expectations for where this season was going to be. And uh, I was very anxious, to see the playoffs, and which would have been starting, right about this week or so, I guess, and or
Yeah.
maybe next week. And I think that we had a real good chance at a first round victory, which would have been our first in 4 years. And then we would have had to face either the Clippers or the Lakers, and obviously the odds would have been stacked against us. But it would have been I think it would have been a good series. Um, so yeah, this was a fun team, probably one of the funnest teams that we've had. I think the fans were really loving what they were seeing, and the low expectations helped. But just the way they played was a lot of fun to watch, and all the crazy comebacks that they'd had. I mean, just kind of record setting. So I'll have fond memories for this team, regardless of what lies ahead. I am confident. I mean, nobody is more innovative and more thoughtful and more decisive in their actions than the NBA. I'm confident they've got a team of experts who gather on a Zoom just like this one and game plan, all kinds of scenarios. But just looking at it from a public health perspective, as I alluded to earlier, I mean, probably the last thing that's going to get ratcheted down as we try to return to normal is going to be massive, gatherings of people. Um, and so even if in a few weeks we're at a position where we've passed the peak and we've got enough testing in place to where we can be more targeted in our restrictions, it's hard to imagine 18,000 people going to the Chesapeake
Yeah.
Arena in the net, anytime soon. I mean, I think you're seeing college football, decision makers having some really hard conversations right now because they can see how unlikely that is even in August, So, having said that, I don't know that that means there's not a room for some sort of version of the NBA. It's just maybe one that doesn't have fans, and I don't know, whether the NBA wants to try that or not. You could imagine a world where they they test all the players, they get a baseline, and then they basically quarantine them and they just play in an empty gym, and they play out, some version of the season, whether it's probably not all the games that were left, but maybe they go right into the playoffs or something, I mean, that's a, and that's not inside information. I can just see, what has to be one of the scenarios out there. And that's an option, I mean, I could see that being an option. We're all desperate for, I mean, look, we're all desperate for entertainment. I mean, you see what Tiger King took over the country, I mean, I think, I think an NBA game, would probably pull a lot of viewers in, but, it's just probably a question of how to structure that. Whether the players are willing to quarantine themselves to the extent necessary to do it and have it be considered safe for the players. So many questions that I'm sure the NBA will figure out. But I expect them to be a trendsetter for all of professional sports because I think they always are. I mean, I think that Commissioner Silver and his team deserve a lot of credit for acting decisively on the night of March 11th and set a tone not just for their league or for professional sports, but really for the whole country. So, I have a lot of confidence they'll do the right thing at the right time. Right now in Oklahoma City, we're right in the middle of this. So, I mean, all of that is very theoretical. I mean, we're not over the peak by any means. Unfortunately, we had our largest death toll yesterday. We'll have one of our largest confirmation of cases today. I mean, so we're right in the middle of it, and it's all very hard to imagine. But I do know there will be a return to some level of normalcy at some point. And I'd love, as a fan, sure, I'd love to see some creative conclusion to this season in June or July or August that maybe doesn't involve fans if that doesn't feel safe. But so, I mean, I'm fine with whatever version they come up with, but I also understand if they feel like it's just too hard and they move on and call it done for this season. But again, I have a lot of confidence that they'll figure out the best path possible. I really think a lot of Commissioner Silver and his leadership of the league. So I'll live with whatever they decide.
Yeah, we're all starved for entertainment just because, like, I'm excited as heck for the horse competition that's going to air on Sunday. And
Yeah.
it's going to be one of those things where I'm probably excited for it and then watch it for a few minutes and go, oh, yeah, it's just guys playing horse. Yeah. But you know what? We're going to cover it regardless because we have something to do.
Have you listened NBA.fm? Have you found that?
I haven't.
Okay, so at NBA.fm, you can listen in real time to the game radio broadcast as if it were happening. And there was a Thunder Lakers game earlier this week, and we got killed. But it's bizarre. I don't understand exactly what they've simulated the game, but then they have a guy and a color guy too, and they call the game as if it takes 2 hours. I mean, it's a whole thing, and they just kind of cut the halftime short. But it's like a totally simulated radio broadcast of a game that was supposed to happen at this time.
Yeah.
In the NBA regular season. You might check it out.
That would be a great idea if they, instead of using like professional play-by-play commentators, just get like Kenny, Shaq, Charles Barkley, Ernie, just have them watching it and just let Chuck say whatever he wants. That would be hilarious. But I guess, you know, with the season being in limbo right now, whether or not it's going to be able to return in some way, shape, or form, or if it's going to be canceled, you know, certain people are kind of also left in limbo with contracts, and one of them being very important for the Thunder, Billy Donovan. He was in the final year of his contract. A lot of speculation as to whether or not the Thunder were going to move forward with him, although Madison and I are pretty much on the same wavelength, and I think a lot of Thunder fans are probably on the same wavelength as well, and I just want to get your opinion on it. I think Billy Donovan has done enough, not just this season, but over the last few seasons, to basically earn those extra years on a new deal. And I'm basically of the opinion that unless Billy Donovan himself wants to just simply do something else, I'm pretty much assuming he's going to be the coach of the Thunder moving forward. But how do you feel about the job he did this season, and are you on that same wavelength as well?
Well, you know, first of all, in Sam I trust, but so I live with any outcome. But obviously, Billy Donovan was on most people's Coach of the Year shortlist this season for what the Thunder surprisingly did. So, you know, I've got no qualms if he's brought back. He's been great. You know, I mean, I think he's made the best of every situation he's been given, and he's been given a lot of different situations in a relatively short span of time.
Yeah, and it's just going to be interesting because, like, when does the off season begin? Obviously, that's going to be a decision that's going to be made on a certain date where the NBA just understands, okay, we can't do anything that we want to do. We're going to have to scrap the season. When does the draft happen? It's just everything's kind of in limbo, like I said. But I don't know. It's Madison. Like, we've only been doing this job for a few years, and we're now doing something that's incredibly unprecedented because sports had been canceled before, World War I, World War II, but there were still sports going on for journalists to cover at the time in some way, shape, or form. And now there's nothing to cover, and that's why we're excited for a horse competition on Sunday.
I'm very excited for the horse competition on Sunday. We were talking about that a little bit on Dylan and Todd's show this morning, and just whether or not we were going to tune in and watch it, because I personally didn't watch the 2K competition that went on, mainly because my knowledge of video games is below, very, very far down. But I'm actually excited for it just because, and feel free to comment on this, either of y'all, but just having sports back on and having something related to it, I think it will very much so help people kind of feel like normalcy is coming, and they can have that excitement of sports back on their television, even if it's just Trae Young shooting crazy shots and hoping that someone can either, match them or do something even better. And so I'm personally very excited for it. I think it will be just like the first step into getting sports back whenever that time may be. And I know that it's so important to be patient with all of this coming back. And so, yeah, personally, I'm excited to watch horse, and I think that it'll be fun to take those baby steps back into seeing sports live in action on television.
Who you got, Chris Paul or Trae Young?
Me?
Horse comp? Me or her? or both?
Both.
Go ahead, David.
Well, I mean, Trae Young's obviously. I'll take Chris Paul as a point guard any day of the week, but in a horse competition, I'd probably have to take Trae Young.
I'm going to have to agree with that. I definitely picked Trae Young. I think he is crafty. I think he's young. I think that he has just the crazy, weird ability to make pretty much anything he launches up go in. And so I'm definitely taking Trae Young to win this whole thing.
Let's hope he just performs better than he did in the 3-point competition, but that's another story. But Mr. Mayor, you've been so gracious with your time with us, and we appreciate that. But really quick before I let you go, because I think we're all kind of, like you said, like, wow, I've not been this close to my family like this much, like ever, like family nights, movie nights, whatever. But is there something that you've, like, now that you have a little bit more time at home than you would have otherwise, are there like any things that you're trying to learn, like maybe like an instrument, or, hey, I've always wanted to learn German, so let me just try to learn German? Like, is there anything keeping you at home that you're like, okay, I've always wanted to do this, now I have no excuse?
Well, unfortunately, you know, just because I'm home, I've still been pretty busy with mayor stuff, you know, and so no, I haven't been able to pick up any new hobbies. But I will say again, you know, that the family walks and the family movie nights, I of late I've been able to, you know, finally shut it down at some point, you know, 6 or 7 o'clock, and those have been great. So, but no, I would love to, you know, write the great American novel with this time in our lives. But unfortunately, I've been pretty swamped. You would think that canceling all my appointments would mean something on terms of saving time, but it's been completely filled with just a never-ending stream of phone calls and Zoom calls that related to COVID-19. So no, I haven't learned German or anything else, but I have revisited some, you know, 1990s summer blockbusters with our kids. So that's
Oh, nice.
That'll work. But yeah, you're obviously you're in high demand, and so we thank you once again for jumping on the OKC 82 podcast. I can probably speak for Madison as well. Your leadership has been unparalleled. Like, I appreciate it. Even going back to March 11th, when I was pretty scared about everything, just seeing your tweets, your Instagram posts, it made me feel a little bit like more optimistic and more safe. So I just, you know, I wanted to thank you for that as well.
Well, that's very kind. I try to communicate at least via social media every day, so people know that we're on top of it and we're aware of it, and we're trying to get back to normal life as quickly as possible, and then try to do the press conferences at least once a week for the same purpose. But I'm glad we could bring you a modicum of comfort in these extraordinary times.
Of course. Well, Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for jumping on the show. We appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you guys. Hang in there and be well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
All right, bye-bye.